Hello, hello. Wonderful to have you here. It's a beautiful day right here. Hope it's nice where you are as well. What I want to discuss today is practicing meditating for worldly ends. I had a comment a while back, a very honest and straightforward comment from a viewer who was concerned that he felt that whenever he wanted to get motivation for practicing, for meditating, let's say, he would think that the meditation would be helpful to him to some worldly gain. It might help him, let's say, make more money, or might help him become more popular, or have a significant other of some kind. It would make his life easier. And he says that he can't rid his mind of the idea that practice is going to be helpful to him in his daily life, make him more famous, make him more popular, make him more wealthy, and all these sort of worldly aims. And he's wondering, at least implicitly wondering, to what extent this is a problem, and to what extent he should be concerned about this. Now, there's many things to say, of course, and there's no way for me to go through them all, but what I want to do is to focus on early Buddhism in particular, which is what I generally do here, and on what the Buddha had to say about such things, because in fact the Buddha had quite a bit to say. Before I get to what the Buddha had to say, though, I want to say a few words as background as to why I think this question tends to come up nowadays. I think it tends to come up because a lot of practitioners, at least contemporarily in the West that I know of, tend to think of practice as a kind of all or nothing phenomenon. You have to be completely committed to your Buddhist practice, or somehow it's really not worthwhile. Now, a lot of this, I think, stems from a kind of a monastic viewpoint here. Monastics, within certainly the early tradition, and even up to the present day in many schools of Buddhism, are people who we might call professional practitioners. They're people who are expected to practice every moment of their waking life, more or less. Certainly that was the Buddha's view. That is to say that for the Buddha, a monastic was somebody who either was teaching the Dharma to others, in particular, let's say, teaching it to lay people or to other monastics, or they were people literally who were supposed to be practicing all the time for the ultimate reward of attaining enlightenment. And for the Buddha, monastics really shouldn't be doing anything else but these two things. And for this reason, there were all kinds of rules within the Vinaya, which is the monastic rule book, basically, talking about how monastics should not be dancing, they shouldn't be singing, they shouldn't be listening to music, they shouldn't be going to see shows, they shouldn't be dressing themselves up to look pretty, they shouldn't even be preparing their own food. Of course, they should not be doing anything that makes money. Indeed, monastics aren't supposed to handle money at all. That is a way of removing from them one potential outlet that could take their minds away from their Dharma practice. And indeed, they're not even supposed to be discussing things that are not directly Dharma related. Now, recently there has been a lot of pushback on what we might call secular mindfulness practices. That is, mindfulness practices that are directed towards ordinary people, lay people like you and me. I'm assuming you're not a monastic. If you are, then I'm talking about the other ones. Lay people with normal lives, and the ways in which this mindfulness practice can make their normal lives better. As I say, there's been pushback on this kind of mindfulness practice, or this aim that's been used for mindfulness. Now, from a monastic point of view, of course, that makes a certain amount of sense, because the monastic is going to be saying, well, but these mindfulness practices are really intended for monastics. They're intended for people who are directed solely towards enlightenment, and so to use them in ways that are not really directly aimed towards enlightenment seems kind of strange, or perhaps a misuse of these kinds of techniques. We also see pushback, however, among a certain group of lay practitioners, academic lay practitioners in particular, and that kind of pushback seems to happen for a few reasons. For religious reasons on the one hand, but also for social and political reasons on another. There is, I think, a certain concern among a group of academic practitioners that there has been a lot of exploitation of workers within contemporary society. And these people are concerned that mindfulness practice not be used as a method to make exploitation of workers somehow easier. That is to say that since mindfulness practice really began in an environment, a rarefied environment of mental purification, it shouldn't simply be used to make us more efficient workers who are therefore more prone, perhaps, to be exploited. What does seem to be true, however, is that mindfulness practice can make us more efficient and better workers under certain circumstances. It can also help us get fired from our jobs, as I argued in a recent video, that is, by making us more attuned to our own ethical understanding of what we're doing, because it's opening up our minds to the variety of all of our internal experience. And I'll get back to a little of that at the end of this video. But in any event, to return to our question, is it reasonable to look to Buddhist practice for worldly ends? Now, if we look to early Buddhism in particular, we find some answers to this question. In fact, the Buddha had quite a bit to say about such things. And indeed, it's actually wrong to assume that the Buddha was opposed to using the kinds of practice that he recommends for worldly ends. We tend to think, again, in this kind of all or nothing kind of mindset that Buddhist practice has to be directed immediately towards enlightenment or not used at all, but that simply isn't the case if you go back to early Buddhism. The Buddha had quite a bit to say, in particular to his lay followers, about the ways to make their lives better, and that would include in worldly ways. For example, the two first of the Buddha's practices that he would recommend to anybody who would come to him for the first time was generosity and ethics. And the ethical practices that the Buddha recommended didn't simply have aims that led us towards enlightenment, but it also had important worldly aims. As the Buddha said, an ethical person gains substantial wealth on account of diligence. Furthermore, the Buddha went on to say that a person who behaves ethically in line with the Buddha's ethical teachings gains a good reputation and self-assurance when having to speak in front of assemblies or crowds. That is to say, and this is important, that the Buddha is saying that if we behave ethically, it's going to make us more likely to be popular, well-respected among our peers, again, able to make money. These are all worldly aims. If we live our lives by not cheating, not stealing, not harming others, by being kind, by being diligent in our work, we can expect, the Buddha says, to be successful in a worldly way. Now, there's of course nothing here about becoming, obscenely wealthy and all the rest. The Buddha is simply saying that if indeed we want to achieve such aims, that the Buddha's own practices can be helpful in that regard. In one wonderful sutta from the Pali tradition, the Buddha is approached by two householders, by the parents of a person named Nakula. And these two householders, who I assume are probably in their middle age, go to the Buddha and say that they have together lived ethically scrupulous lives, and that furthermore that they love each other, and that they want to be together. They want to remain together in this life, and potentially want to do whatever it takes to be reborn together in the next life. And so they are going to the Buddha to ask for advice. What should they do to make this come true? And the Buddha gives them quite a lovely response. What the Buddha says is this: householders, if wife and husband want to see each other in both this life and the next, they should be equals in faith ethical conduct, generosity, and wisdom. When both are faithful and bountiful, disciplined, living righteously, then wife and husband say nice things to each other. They get all the things they need, so they live at ease. Their enemies are downhearted when both are equal in ethics. Having practiced the teaching here, both equal in precepts and observances, they delight in the heavenly realm, enjoying all the pleasures they desire. So here's the Buddha's advice: to remain steadfast in their ethical practices, in their wisdom, in their generosity, and they will have a wonderful rebirth. They'll be able to be together. Now, does this capture what we might call the heart of the Buddhist doctrine? Of course not. It doesn't. The heart of the Buddhist doctrine involves our attempting to uproot our ordinary craving, and so therefore, in so doing, uproot dukkha, uproot the suffering that comes from that craving. In this particular instance, the Buddha is recommending something that is deeply intertwined with certain kind of craving. The craving that we have that's involved with our sort of worldly love for our spouse, let's say. But Buddhist practice, the practice that the Buddha suggests for us, lies along a continuum. We might even say a path from more to less worldly ends. And some of us may be perfectly content staying with the more worldly side of things, the shallower end of the pool, if you like. And there's really nothing specifically wrong in that, except that these more worldly kinds of aims will tend still to have dukkha involved in them to a degree. However, so long as we are following that path, we will be pursuing these aims ethically. That is, we won't be harming other people, at least as much as we can manage. And so that's a good thing. And if we keep up on that path, we will, over time, learn more and more about the dangers involved in pursuit of such worldly ends. And in learning of those dangers, our ordinary grasping towards them will tend to lessen over time. As we become more intimately aware of these dangers, we will tend to crave them less. But this can, indeed, for many of us, be a very lengthy process. And we shouldn't necessarily feel that we have to rush the process along. We shouldn't feel bad about ourselves because we're beginners, because we're just getting started, or because we understand things intellectually but don't yet understand them quite fully in our hearts yet. So the lesson here is to begin where you are. Not to kick yourself, again, for being a beginner if you are a beginner, but to work forward, to keep the Buddha's practices in mind. And also, I think it's important to keep in mind that some of the later Buddhist schools, again, my aim is mostly to teach about early Buddhism because it's not so well known, but many of the later Buddhist schools contain more of an idea of practice in a lay context. So we can look to some later schools to give us more ideas of such practices in sort of ordinary life. All that said, it's important to keep in mind that regular mindfulness practice can indeed be helpful to us in our work. It can make work easier. It can make work more focused and productive. At the same time, it can also make work more difficult by making us aware of some of our deeply held ethical principles. And I did a prior video on that I mentioned earlier on in this one, and I'll leave a link to that video up here on the screen if you haven't seen it or would like to refresh your memory. If you're getting something out of these videos of mine, consider taking a look at my Patreon page, which is linked down below, and see if you want to help support the channel. Thanks so much, and we'll catch you on the next one. And meanwhile, all of you, be well.